He didn't argue when it became public. He didn't rush in front of cameras to defend himself. He didn't offer explanations. Robin Gibb stood still while the story moved faster than he could. By the time the headlines began circulating, the damage inside his marriage had already been done. This wasn't just about an affair. It was about what happens to a marriage when betrayal stops being private and becomes permanent. If you care about the real stories behind the legends, the moments they never explain, subscribe to RetroWaves. Robin Gibb had been married to Dwina Murphy-Gibb since 1985. By the late 2000s, they had built more than 2 decades of shared life. They had raised a son together. They had endured the collapse and revival of the Bee Gees. They had survived fame, financial turbulence, and the quiet aftermath of disco backlash. From the outside, their marriage appeared settled. Then, in 2008, it became public that Robin had fathered a child with another woman. The child had been born months earlier. The relationship had taken place while he was still married. And suddenly, what had been private became headline material. This wasn't speculation, it was confirmed. The affair had resulted in a daughter, and with that confirmation, the story stopped being rumor and became fact. For Robin, the public revelation was humiliating. For Dwina, it was something else. It meant that the betrayal would never fade quietly into memory. There would always be a living reminder, a permanent branch added to the family tree under circumstances no one had prepared for. It's easy to reduce stories like this to a single question. Why did he do it? But that question doesn't hold attention for long. The deeper one is this: why did she stay? Dwina was not a silent bystander in Robin's life. She had her own identity, an artist, a writer, someone who moved in cultural circles independent of her husband's fame. Their marriage had been described by those close to them as unconventional at times, shaped by long tours, separate creative pursuits, and periods of distance. Still, distance is not the same as betrayal. When news broke that Robin had fathered a child outside the marriage, the Gibb family shifted. There were legal proceedings connected to the child's support. There were public statements acknowledging paternity, and there was no room left for denial. Robin accepted responsibility, but responsibility and repair are not the same thing. What made this different from the private indiscretions of other public figures was its permanence. An affair might fade, a child does not, and that reality changes the emotional terrain of a marriage. The public saw the headlines. What they didn't see was the recalibration happening behind closed doors. A marriage that had once operated within a certain understanding now had to redefine itself under pressure. There is no verified record of private arguments, no documented transcripts of what was said in their home during that time. And that absence matters, because what survives in the public record is restraint. Dwina did not launch public attacks. She did not grant interviews designed to wound. She did not narrate the details of her pain for tabloids. A measured silence can look passive from the outside, but sometimes it is deliberate. Within the first year after the revelation, Robin and Dwina remained together. They appeared publicly at events. They continued to present as a married couple, which only intensified the curiosity. Why would she stay? It wasn't ignorance. The facts were clear. It wasn't denial. The paternity was confirmed. So what held the marriage in place? To understand that, you have to step back. Robin Gibb's life had always unfolded under exposure. As 1/3 of the Bee Gees, he had grown up famous. The band's harmonies defined an era. The disco explosion made them global icons. The backlash nearly erased them from radio. Then came resurgence through songwriting, film soundtracks, and reinvention. Fame was not episodic for Robin, it was structural. When you live decades under scrutiny, your marriage doesn't exist in isolation. It becomes part of the architecture of public identity. For more than 20 years, Dwina had stood beside him through that. She had been there after the death of his twin brother Morris in 2003, a loss that devastated Robin. Interviews from that period describe him as withdrawn, shaken, emotionally altered by grief. Grief changes people. Sometimes it softens them, sometimes it fractures them. There is no verified documentation linking that loss directly to his later affair. Any psychological interpretation beyond what he publicly stated would be speculation. But timeline matters. Morris died in 2003. The affair that resulted in Robin's daughter occurred several years later. In between, there were tours, appearances, efforts to preserve legacy, and perhaps distance. The public tends to view affairs in moral shorthand. Right, wrong, end of story. But long marriages are rarely that simple, especially ones built under spotlight. The child born from the affair was named Snow Robin. The name alone ensured the story would never fully detach from his public persona. When legal discussions about financial support surfaced, the story resurfaced with them. Every development reopened the wound. This was not a one-day scandal. It was a recurring headline. And every time it reappeared, Dwina had to choose again whether to remain. It wasn't the initial revelation that tested the marriage the most. It was the repetition, because scandal fades for the public. It lingers for the people living inside it. By 2009 and 2010, Robin and Dwina were still together. There was no dramatic separation announcement, no public dissolution. Instead, there was something quieter, continuation. But continuation doesn't mean restoration, and this is where the emotional center of the story shifts. It wasn't the affair that defined the rest of their marriage. It was the decision that followed it. Continuation can look stable from a distance. Two people still standing next to each other at public events. Two names still legally bound. No announcement, no spectacle. But continuation after betrayal is not the same thing as going back. When a marriage absorbs something like this, it doesn't return to its original shape. It reorganizes. By the time 2010 arrived, Robin and Dwina had entered a new phase of their relationship, one defined less by image and more by quiet negotiation. And there were practical realities. Robin had acknowledged paternity. Financial arrangements were handled through the courts. His daughter would exist in the world, whether the public paid attention or not. And that meant the past would not stay in the past. For Dwina, staying meant accepting that permanence, not forgiving and forgetting, but choosing to remain in a marriage that now included a visible fracture. It's important to be precise here, and there is no documented interview where Dwina details the private conversations that followed the revelation. She has spoken publicly over the years about loyalty, endurance, and love, but not in a way that sensationalizes that period. What exists in the public record is behavior. She stayed. And staying is not passive. It requires a decision that must be renewed daily. Around this time, Robin's public life was still active. He continued performing. He continued participating in BG's retrospectives. He spoke often about legacy, about songwriting, about the endurance of music, but something subtle had shifted. In interviews from the late 2000s and early 2010s, Robin's tone often carried reflection. There was less bravado, more emphasis on gratitude, on survival. It would be easy to retroactively frame that as regret tied directly to the affair. That would be speculation. What we can say is this: when a public figure faces humiliation and does not fight it publicly, that silence changes perception. Robin did not wage a campaign to reshape the narrative. He acknowledged the child. He fulfilled obligations. He did not publicly criticize his wife. He did not publicly defend himself in emotional terms either. He absorbed it. And Dwina remained beside him. This is where the story deepens, because the real tension wasn't between Robin and the press. It was between memory and forward motion. A marriage after betrayal becomes layered. There is the original love story. There is the moment of rupture. And then there is the long stretch of ordinary days that follow, where the decision to remain becomes less dramatic and more deliberate. Those ordinary days don't make headlines, but they define whether a marriage survives. By 2011, Robin faced something far more serious than public scandal, who was diagnosed with serious health issues, including liver and colon cancer. Suddenly, the narrative shifted again. Health collapses reorder priorities. Public humiliation becomes secondary to survival. During his illness, Dwina was present. She spoke publicly about his strength. She appeared at his side during difficult periods. When he fell into a coma in 2012 due to pneumonia complications, she was there. Crisis clarifies: when someone you love is fighting for life, resentment can either harden or dissolve. We do not have transcripts of what passed between them in hospital rooms. What we have are outcomes. She did not step away. If the affair had permanently severed the foundation of their marriage, illness would have exposed it. Instead, what appeared publicly was solidarity. This is the midpoint reframe. It wasn't the affair that ultimately defined their marriage. It was illness, because illness strips performance away. There is no image to maintain when mortality enters the room. Only choice. Robin briefly recovered in 2012, defying early expectations. He returned home. There were hopeful interviews, moments of optimism. Then the cancer returned aggressively. He died in May 2012 at the age of 62. In the immediate aftermath, Dwina did not define his legacy by scandal. She spoke of his music, his persistence, his identity beyond headlines. That choice matters, because legacy can be framed in many ways. She could have allowed the affair to permanently color public memory. Instead, she anchored his story in artistry. That doesn't erase what happened, it contextualizes it. The child from the affair remained part of the extended narrative. There were later legal complexities regarding inheritance and recognition. Those developments unfolded through official channels, not dramatic public confrontation. What stands out across the record is restraint. Dwina did not weaponize the past. She did not publicly reopen wounds. Which raises the deeper question: was staying about forgiveness? Or was it about something else entirely? Long marriages often survive not because betrayal disappears, but because the alternative feels heavier. Leaving would have meant untangling decades of shared identity, shared grief over Morris, shared parenting of their son, shared navigation of fame, shared history that began long before the affair. When you build a life over 25 years, walking away is not just an emotional decision, it is structural. By the time Robin became ill, their marriage had already endured its greatest public test. Illness added a second layer, and in that second layer, something quieter emerged. Presence, not dramatic reconciliation, not grand gestures, just presence. And sometimes that is the clearest answer available. But even presence does not erase consequence. After Robin's death, the complexities around inheritance and recognition resurfaced publicly, including discussions involving his daughter born from the affair. The permanence remained, which brings us back to the core tension. Staying does not undo, it absorbs, and absorption leaves marks. After Robin Gibb died in May 2012, the public conversation returned to what it always returns to with artists of his scale. The music, the harmonies, the falsetto, the Bee Gees' improbable rise, fall, and resurgence. But inside the private architecture of his life, another story was still unfolding, because death does not simplify what came before it, it preserves it. In the years that followed, discussions around Robin's estate became public. Legal proceedings addressed the distribution of assets. His will, originally written years earlier, became a point of attention. Among the complexities were matters concerning his daughter, Snow Robin, the child born from the affair that had shaken his marriage. Inheritance disputes are rarely simple, even in stable families. In families marked by rupture, they reopen old fault lines. There were legal challenges, claims, counterclaims, not tabloid spectacle, but structured, documented legal disagreement. It wasn't about gossip anymore. It was about recognition, about where permanence fits inside legacy. Dwina, as Robin's widow, was at the center of those proceedings. She had remained beside him through illness. She had spoken of his artistry and devotion to music. She had defended his legacy publicly when questions arose about his health and final months. But now the permanence of the past required legal clarity. And this is where the emotional truth settles. The affair did not end the marriage, it altered it. The child did not disappear from the narrative. She became part of it. And Dwina's decision to stay meant that when legacy was being defined legally and publicly, she would be the one navigating those definitions. It would be easy to reduce this to loyalty, or to pride, or to forgiveness. But long marriages do not survive scandal because one person simply absorbs pain without consequence. They survive because both people, in different ways, decide that the shared structure is worth preserving, even if it looks different than it once did. There is no verified record of Robin offering a dramatic public apology tour, no documented interview where he unraveled the emotional mechanics of what happened inside his marriage. What exists instead is pattern. After the revelation, he did not leave. After illness struck, she did not leave. After death, she protected the shape of his legacy. That pattern tells its own story. The midlife affair became a permanent branch in the Gibb family tree. It introduced a new life into the world. It complicated inheritance. It forced private reckoning, but it did not dismantle the marriage. And that is the part that unsettles people. Because culturally, we expect rupture to lead to ending. We expect betrayal to produce separation. When it doesn't, we search for explanation. Was it obligation? Was it denial? Was it strategic? Or was it something more layered, something less cinematic and more human? There is a line that emerges when you look at the timeline carefully, and it wasn't the scandal that defined their final years, it was mortality. When Robin was hospitalized in 2012, slipping in and out of consciousness, the question inside that hospital room was not about 2008. It was about survival, about breath, about time. Public humiliation fades in the face of mortality. Resentment competes with fear of loss, and often fear wins. In interviews following his brief recovery, Robin spoke about gratitude, about feeling as though he had been given another chance. He spoke about music as life force. He did not publicly relitigate the past, perhaps because by then the past had already been metabolized inside the marriage. We cannot know the exact emotional negotiations that occurred between them. What we can see is trajectory. After 2008, they did not fragment publicly. After 2012, she did not distance herself from his memory. Instead, she became one of the guardians of it. She continued speaking about his work. She participated in tributes. She helped shape how the Bee Gees' story would be told in the years that followed. If the affair had permanently hollowed out the marriage, that role would have felt performative. Instead, it appeared integrated. And here is the emotional truth delivered quietly. The affair hurt. It shifted the family. It created permanent complexity. But it did not erase the decades that came before it, nor did it prevent presence at the end. Sometimes staying is not about pretending something didn't happen. It is about deciding that one mistake, even a life-altering one, does not get to define the entirety of a shared history. That does not make the pain smaller. It makes the decision larger. Robin Gibb's public identity will always be anchored in music, in harmonies that shaped a generation, in falsetto notes that carried emotion across decades. But inside his private life, the defining question was not about pitch or legacy. It was about endurance. And Dwina's answer was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was not explained in a tell-all interview. It was visible in continuity, in hospital rooms, in courtrooms, in memorial tributes, in the choice to remain part of the same story even after it fractured. That is harder to categorize than scandal, harder to debate, harder to sensationalize, which is why it often goes unnoticed. But for those looking closely, it reveals something more complicated than betrayal alone. The truth about the affair hurt. It reshaped their marriage. It introduced permanent change. But in the end, what defined them was not the rupture. It was the decision to stay and to carry the weight of that decision all the way to the final chapter. And that is rarely the version told in headlines.